In this section, I want to discuss what actually happened on the day of mediation. As mentioned earlier, Jody Meggs, the man whom I was divorcing under this court-ordered mediation by a divorce court judge, and for divorce-related community property which Jody owned shares, left mediation for lack of money to pay for the mediation. I sent emails to the lawyers showing that Jody and I were going to work together to bring Johnston to justice for his actions with the company. I told Zucker that I wanted the company. Yet for some reason, which appears to be to isolate me from my only true support at mediation, Jody left mediation while an irrevocable document sat with the Harris County Court, signed by his lawyer earlier and the day before by Evans, which gave him money for this mediation. Everyone knew he left for lack of money, yet no one bothered to tell him that he had the money. Bergman went from room to room wondering whether to continue. Although looking back on the situation, the removal of Jody appeared planned, especially now that I saw my case files where Zucker emailed all, stating that there was some reason Jody was leaving, while Zucker knew full well it was because he had no money. And that was a big decision at mediation that day. So, I was isolated with no support to protect me or represent me. At that time, I thought Zucker represented me until I found my claims given away after I received my case files in 2018. When Jody left, Zucker told me that I had to stay at mediation and participate with whatever I was asked to do, or the judge would rule against me and I would lose my company, regardless of any decisions agreed upon. Hence, the abuse began as I was there solely to regain the company from the asset depletion of Johnston. And at that, it began without Jody, whom they all knew was going to work with me to bring Johnston to justice. Then the abuse continued. The first meeting was solely to tell me that the man who I greatly feared now had worsened mental health and required more powerful medications. Until I received my case files in 2018, I could not understand how such a seasoned and well-respected mediator in the community could not realize how threatening the statement was to me about someone who I was afraid. And that was the only question and topic for that first meeting of the series. Bergman watched intently for my response to that threat. At the time, I thought that was weird. Now I believe it was Bergman's intention to place me in a state of fear, as psychology shows fear makes people more malleable to get what they want. And Bergman is very experienced in such, as is found in various articles and websites. What did Bergman want? Was it Bergman's intention to handle me to a position to protect Brady and possibly Frankfurt, as found in the email of Zucker and Boer? Why else? The second meeting of this mediation was a play between Bergman and Zucker that I did not have claims against the opposing attorneys, Brady and Frankfurt. Both Bergman and Zucker went so far as to say that Michelle Boer, although energetic, was not very smart. She was the one that told me I had claims before it, deposition. I did not know about the email and stating that I did have claims. Instead, I found their statements condescending to women, an insult to Boer, and possible discrimination against women, leading me to be more concerned over my position in mediation. Of greatest interest lies in what I found in my case files in 2018, as it turns out that Bergman was fully aware and knew all my claims against Johnston and the opposing attorneys, yet never told me, nor did Zucker. If you look at the memorandum for mediation issued in July and August, that was never shown to me or told to me even after asking about my claims. Why did they intentionally hide these claims from me? Zucker went into great detail over how Bergman was known for his food at mediation, as he had mediated with Bergman many times and was a friend of his. I found myself horribly exhausted 1 hour after the only meal at noon, to the point of groaning and putting my head on the table, in such a display of emotion of which I would not normally show. I had forgotten I had taken something to block my severe anxiety from seeing the man who attempted to steal my stock and manipulated Centria for his personal agenda through aggressive tactics, with the appearance of assistance of the opposing counsel that was actually present at that mediation. This was a very stressful situation. Even so, this extreme tiredness was unusual, as I took anxiety medications periodically in the past without any problems, as occurred at this mediation. It's true that I could not sleep the night before for fear of confronting a man that I feared, but the tiredness seemed strange. My extreme tiredness, the purchasing and distribution of alcohol, along with some distorted observations, and filled with threats, is in the memorandum that Zucker emailed to me, to apparently threaten me to sign the printed version of the mediation agreement, which I call the confession email, as seen here. Notice the highlighted areas and numerous threats for not complying with signed the printed version. It's an example of emotional abuse. Although sworn and attested to by Zucker and used by Bergman as truth in Zucker's observations, Borer added parts to this confession email, of which events she could not have known as she was not there. Again, look at the confession email, with color additions showing those additions to which Borer was not a witness, and thus making this document appear fraudulent. And yet it was sworn and attested to as the truth by Zucker. Yet Zucker knew Borer added those parts and pretended not to know in this email to me. After my telling Zucker that I was unusually exhausted, Zucker just said that mediation could go into the wee hours. All I wanted to do was go home, but I couldn't, or the judge would rule against me and I would lose my company per Zucker that morning. By 3 p.m., when no resolution was possible, and strangely, terms were not really discussed at all, Bergman wanted to isolate me without counsel with Johnston, again, whom I feared, and could not say no per Zucker. I asked Zucker if that was okay, and he looked out the window and said yes. I could not leave. I could not refuse to be isolated with the man whom I feared, and Bergman isolated me with Zucker's approval. At one point, Johnston breathed down my neck and wanted scotch. I could not refuse the alcohol that Johnston insisted upon, as I did not want to lose my company, as Zucker said, and I was too afraid to make Johnston angry, as he had already slid up his chair on confrontation while alone with Bergman. I was not sure what else to do. Bergman allowed Frankfurt to leave in the middle of mediation, go to a liquor store and purchase alcohol. Bergman then showed Frankfurt where the glasses were to pour the scotch, which is also apparently an expression of support by Bergman and support for drinking during mediation. At no time did Bergman request or insist drinking did not occur, as he allowed all actions for this to take place and insisted in finding the glasses. And I could not refuse. I felt alone and afraid. Bergman allowed Frankfurt to pour not one but 2 glasses of scotch, while my lawyer was still not present, in what could only be a method to coerce me for whatever way Bergman was to handle me and my claims given to him by Zucker and Borer per that email. I remained very afraid. I had been to mediations before, but we always left at 3 p.m. and I was never forced to drink or left alone with my adversary. Never was I forced to stay and participate, as I was at this mediation. After Frankfurt poured the first glasses of scotch, he gave it to Johnston, who slid the glass to me with his hand over the glass instead of around it. After that, I could no longer remember how I got from one room to the next. Time disappeared. In addition, both Frankfurt and Bergman watched intently as Johnston slid the glass to me. At first, I did not understand, but when I could no longer remember blocks of time, I became even more fearful as I felt that I had no one to protect me, to stand up for me. My fear grew. I felt that I was in danger, but I could not leave or risk forever losing my company. When Zucker finally came into the conference room after the opposing counsel had been there long enough to leave for the liquor store and pour 2 glasses of scotch, Zucker seemed irritated that I had questions. I tripped before entering a separate room, and I believe that Zucker asked me if I was okay. Zucker told me that I could not ask for legal fees as it was too late. I was so confused. Next thing I know, I am sitting in the next room. The room was very dark. The man I feared was in front of me. Bergman to the right, and to the far left was Zucker, Frankfurt, and Brady. I never lost time before. I had never just appeared in a chair in another room without knowing how I got there. What else happened that I did not remember? My fear became almost paralyzing. While Zucker, Frankfurt, and Brady were talking at the other end of the table, I suddenly became very thirsty. Upon reaching for the remainder of my second glass of scotch as the only drink available, I noticed my fingers had turned dark purple. I placed my hands close to my face because the room was very dark, and I wanted to see why my fingers were turning purple. I could see Bergman watching me between my fingers and felt a bit silly at first, but then I didn't care because I was worried why my fingers were purple. As I looked at the fingers on my left hand, I saw Bergman between my fingers lean over to Johnston and ask if I was going to be okay. My first thought was that Johnston would be happy to get rid of me so he could continue taking his Century assets. And after Bergman told me about Johnston's new drugs, I couldn't understand why Bergman would think that Johnston would tell him the truth. Unless Johnston actually slipped a drug into my drink and Bergman knew and became concerned for his participation in this event, especially with my fingers turning purple. Otherwise, Johnston could not answer for my health. I was so very alone, afraid, and stuck. I prayed continuously for this mediation to end and the light of the Holy Spirit to surround me, protect me, and keep me from falling asleep for fear that I would not force myself to breathe while unconscious. I feared death, and that if such would occur, that they would find a way to victim blame me with lies to protect themselves. I believe the discussions at the other end of the table placed the Century under my own ownership, as I discussed with Zucker. I was wrong. Next thing I know, Zucker physically pushed on my arm to sign a document he shoved in front of me. He pushed again, which frightened me more, as Zucker had never touched me. And now he was touching me to sign a document that I told him that I did not want to sign and I could not see. When I was told that the draft mediation agreement was only to show the judge that we were there and I participated, I signed on the wrong line and signed again twice. I did not see this document again until I received my case files in 2018. Later, a different document was shown to me as the original one, with Eagle's Claw added and to conceal that I had signed on the wrong line. I did not remember the second one that they testified to as original. I would never have committed Eagle's Claw, my relief company, to anything within this mediation. It has nothing to do with mediation or events. Yet someone forged Eagle's Claw in the draft mediation agreement. I believe that Eagle's Claw was forged onto a second document to conceal my incapacitation from alcohol and drugging. As difficult as some may see this occurring, remember that Bergman allowed opposing counsel to leave mediation, go to a liquor store in the middle of mediation, and pour scotch for me twice without my counsel present. Forging a document to hide my incapacitation and then insisting that it was binding later only serves to fulfill the self-serving purposes of getting me to sign a document that later frees opposing counsel of any liability. A liability mentioned in the email from Zucker to Boer, acknowledging my claims against the opposing attorney. Their intent to hide my claims from me, and Bergman handling me to protect me from learning of these claims. This next story and continuation of the mediation events is special, very special. As this event at mediation is one of the few moments that I can remember from the beginning, but I did not truly understand what had happened until just last month. The last thing on the day of mediation that I remember is standing with a couple of others in a meeting room, facing the doorway where Bergman stood just outside the door. Bergman told me that he would like me to stay later to discuss how I came to agree to 4% and something else. Not remembering the 4% and other points as well, and feeling like I had to participate to keep my company, I agreed to stay with him afterwards, after everyone had left, and discuss those points which I did not remember. Suddenly, Bergman turned his head to the left, as if someone had said something to him, but I couldn't see who that person was. Immediately, Bergman turned back to me and said, "Maybe not tonight," as it was late. It was 10:30 p.m. Next thing I know, I am standing in the middle of a staircase and Zucker asking me if I was okay. After all these years, I now understand what I remembered. I am not sure who Bergman turned towards behind that wall, but I'm very grateful for that person. If I knew who he was, I would thank him for protecting me in an environment where I had no one, and that was filled with abuse for an agenda seemingly built upon fraud and conspiracy, an agenda to protect what could be criminal activities of the opposing attorneys, for creating and assisting in documents used to shareholder press and steal my shares and assets of the company. Through all of this abuse, someone behind that wall protected me that night. If he sees this video, then thank you. Thank you. I owe you for this. And I guess after this mediation, I can say me too. Me too.